Hello and welcome to our 20th tutorial. I believe it's the 20th. In this tutorial we're going to be looking at how to actually create stored procedures and test your stored procedures. So if you go ahead and open up your AdventureWorks and come down to where it says Programmability, you'll see the section called Stored Procedures. To create a new stored procedure, we're just going to right click on where it says New Stored Procedure. And then what you're going to get is you're going to get a bunch of commented out stuff. In case you're wondering what this is, anytime you use the double slash, that's to write a comment or just a block of code that basically will be ignored during execution. And we call that commenting. So what you can do here is you can fill this out. Generally a good idea to fill this out, especially when you're in a working environment. And that just kind of lets them know, like if somebody's working on this stored procedure, lets them know who they can go talk to as to what the initial purpose was of this stored procedure. So when you're creating your stored procedure, you just need to give it a name. This is generally how I set mine up. And we're going to be working with the person address table as we've always been working with. So we're going to say store procedure person underscore address. I think we're going to be getting the address. Yep, the address by ID. So let's go over this real quickly before we go any further. So what I've done here is I'm saying that we're working with the DBO schema, and we'll go over schemas later. And then we're saying that this is a stored procedure, and it relates to this table, and this is what it's actually doing, or the function that I wanted to perform, essentially, or the query, what the query is going to be doing. It's getting an address by ID. The next part here is we need to tell it what type of variable or data type you're going to pass in. So I'm going to tell it there's going to be an @ indicating that this is a value that's being passed in, not something that's in the database, but something I'm actually necessarily passing in. Technically it will be in the database, it's just that I'm passing the value in. So I don't really know how else to explain that. It's the value that you're going to pass in from an outside source. So we want to pass in the address ID because we're doing it by ID as it's indicating here, and the ID is an integer. So you can either say as int, or you can just type int. I usually use the as keyword, but you can do it however you want. DBA will probably tell you however they want it. I usually let the set count on. It's not a big deal. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of set count because it's really not needed in this case. And then now we're going to actually write our actual select statement. So I want to select everything. And this is obviously going to be from our person address table. And then we need our where clause. So I want the address ID where it equals this variable that I'm going to be passing in. Alright, and then I'm going to go ahead and execute, and we'll create this stored procedure. Now, problem is we don't know if this stored procedure actually works. Number one. Number two, we don't even know if it's even in there yet. So to see if it's in there, let's go ahead and refresh programmability. And it should be right there. It is. So we'll go ahead and modify it now. So now instead of saying create, it says alter. So when you create the procedure, it's adding it in here, and then when you alter it, you're just updating an existing one. So I could change this to say big int, for example. Execute. Close all these out. Refresh this. Open it back up to modify it. And now saying int is saying big int. But it's not a big int. If we look at the table, it needs to match this value that we're trying to pass in. So that's an integer, so we need to change that back. So let's go ahead and execute. Close it out. Now you don't always have to close that out. I'm just doing that just to show you the change has occurred. So as you can see, it's changed. Now we need to test this. There's two ways to test this. The easiest way is to simply do what we call like cut the top off, quote unquote. And then instead of passing in the value, we're going to say we're going to declare the value or the variable. Comment that as out because otherwise it'll throw an error. And then we need to actually set the value. So in this case, I'm going to set it to 1. So it's going to say that this address ID equals 1, and then it's going to perform this select statement. So if we execute, we're actually going to see this in action. Now there is another way to do this as well. So what you can do is you can take the store procedure's name, create a whole new query. You can say exec, which means execute, procedure's name, space, and then whatever the arguments are, which in this case, the argument is 1. Because that's all we had. If we had another value here, for example, or a variable, then we would just use a comma. 1, for example, and so on and so forth. As you can see, now we can actually execute that store procedure to test it. We can do other things too. We can say pass in different variables. And as you can see, we're only pulling that record, which is record 12 currently that we just selected. So we're only grabbing that record. So that's where the primary key is very important, that it be a unique value. So when you're pulling back records, you're only pulling back one specific record, or specifically the records that you want. And that ID really helps, because most of the times you'll be pulling by the ID. Alright, so that's pretty much how you test a store procedure, create a store procedure. Pretty basic stuff.